look at all the native cultures, Native Americans, if you go back to the Druid, it doesn't even matter what culture it is. If you go far enough back, you can see that music and dance were a huge part of pretty much every culture that we know about.
Welcome to the Optimum Human Podcast, the show that interviews the world's top experts in fitness, nutrition, mindset, and beyond. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Optimum Human Podcast. My name is Brian McKay, he's Claude Petroulis, and we've got another amazing guest on today. Today's guest is a little bit different than most of our health and fitness guests. Today we're speaking with Michael Peters. Michael, how are you today, man?
I'm well, Brian. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to have you on. And Claude, how are you doing, man?
I'm always fantastic. You know what? I'm just loving Canadian Turkey Day, even though this is going to come out in like 3 years, so people won't know. But today's Canadian Thanksgiving, so I'm full of turkey, and I'm barely conscious, but I'm very good, very good.
Excellent. Well, I got nothing to say.
Wow,
to that.
I didn't know. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. It was happy. There's lots of turkey, and I'm very pleased with myself and the amount that I ate.
Absolutely.
So
go ahead,
Brian.
Claude.
All right. So the first thing I want to ask you, Michael, is what do you do? If you had to summarize, I guess.
that's a broad one. What do I do? Like right now, I'm doing a podcast interview. Do you mean like with the dance meditation?
Yes. What do you do? What is your current career? What do you do with people?
How do you serve the world?
So
yeah. Oh, that's even deeper.
I don't
Brian,
know. That's pretty deep, and I don't know if I could say I do serve the world. I think that would be up to the world to decide. But since I was 19, I've been self-employed, and as a landscape architect, that was my original business. My former mother-in-law is like a famous gardener, and she's had her gardens on HGTV, and she has a flower named after her from a hybridizer of lilies, I believe. It was an Asiatic lily called the Betty Sturley.
Whoa.
And so, yeah, I got to be her only apprentice, and it was a really fortunate thing. I grew up in her gardens and got to work in her gardens, and one thing led to another. And with the help of my brother-in-law also, I was able to get started building and designing gardens for people at a pretty young age. And so, but during that time, I was also very heavily involved in studying and practicing various different forms of meditation. And in fact, my mother-in-law introduced me to a woman who I would consider my primary and first teacher in terms of meditation and the healing arts and things like that.
And who is that?
Her name's Safi. Her original name was Vera Nediminsky. She was actually the former wife of Vaclav Nediminsky, who was the first Czechoslovakian hockey player to defect from communist Czechoslovakia and play in the United States. So at the time in the 80s, he was like it was a really big deal. He was one of the original Eastern European players. He might have been the original Eastern European player to come over and play in the United States.
Well, that's a truly rebellious thing to do, especially back then. That was a big no-no in a lot of people's books.
Yeah, it really was. In fact, she told me once that they could not fly anywhere in Europe until communist Czechoslovakia was had transformed, because if for some reason the plane was rerouted and landed in the Czech Republic, they'd be put in jail. So yeah, it was kind of and she was a Olympic downhill skier for the Czech Republic, and also a photographer. So she was an athlete and an artist. And
wow.
When she got to the United States, she started her own program much later on in life, studying with Gabriel Chin, who is a very well-known Qigong and Tai Chi teacher in Ann Arbor. So anyhow, my former mother-in-law, Betty Sterling, introduced me to Safi, and we studied with her together and practiced with her together for years. So gardens and the study and practice of meditation were very alive for me since I was probably 17. And then as, you know, in the garden world in Michigan, as I think, well, Brian, you know for sure. Cloud, are you from Michigan?
I'm from Toronto, so okay. I know that it's just cold in Michigan.
Yeah. Well, Toronto, I don't know what the zone is up there. You're probably a zone 5 or something, zone 4. It's similar climate to Detroit. So, you know, during the summer, during the spring, summer. What's that?
You have less bullets falling down from the sky.
You have less bullets. Now you do.
Yeah.
Who knows about the future?
Wait until the Trump presidency. Anyway, sorry.
No, so we've got, you know, in the winter times, I would have a lot of downtime, and I got into, you know, I found myself after working with Safi. Her program was called TTC, Transforming Tension into Creativity, TTC. And, you know, I'd never considered myself artistic or musical, anything like that. Never felt like I was, you know, those qualities were something that I possessed. But after, you know, a year or so of working with her, I began experiencing tremendous creativity in how I wrote. I started writing poetry. I started playing music. My capacity to envision and see things in my mind, like not mystically, but in the sense of how a designer can see a room or see what would look good in a room before it's there. That's like something obviously. Visualizing, right? Like landscape architecture, of course, that's a main thing. So, and then of course with movement, became very creative with different forms of movement because we were doing yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong and dance and things like this. So it started to dawn on me like, wow, this is why she calls it TTC, Transforming Tension into Creativity. It really, really did that. And so that creative expression began to manifest itself in terms of inventions. I was inventing things all the time and then trying to get them to the market, which was anyone who's invented anything knows it's very difficult to take it from.
What's your most the invention you created that you're most proud
of? Well, you know, it's all of them, quite honestly.
Okay, cool.
It'd be hard to say one more than the other, but dance meditation technique itself, I would say I'm the most proud of in terms of its impact on my life and the lives of other people. Although there were a couple other ones that one in particular I can't mention, but because it's still on the shelf and it's still something I'm hanging on to, and when the day's right, I'm excited to bring it to market. But yeah, dance meditation technique I think is definitely one. There's another one I created called the Farm Contractor, which is a business model that I did not successfully get going, although I did spend quite a bit of time trying to find revenue for it. And I don't know if you want me to go further in the direction of explaining what that is.
I'm kind of curious.
Okay, so check this out, all right? So I'm building and designing gardens for people, and then I start getting into health and wellness and realizing how important it is to grow your own food, how easy it is to grow your own food. And then I started wondering, like, how the hell did we get away from growing our own food? How did we go from people having fruit trees and bramble patches to putting in, you know, these hybridized pear trees that don't produce any pears? You know, you're paying for the tree, you're paying to maintain the tree, and you don't get shit from it except some flowers in the spring and some color in the fall. You know, there was a time when
oxygen.
True, very true, very true.
There you go.
Very true. Very true. Oxygen. But there was a time, you know, when had you spent, you know, several $1,000s on trees and none of them produced a nut or a fruit, you know, people, it wouldn't make any sense. This was those were the habits of very, very wealthy people, to spend that kind of money on ornamental trees and plants. average person wasn't going to spend that kind of money on a tree that didn't produce fruit. And so, of course, as I tried building more edible elements into my landscape designs, I began to find the answer to why no one wanted to do it, which is it was a lot of maintenance. It was a lot of work. People felt like having fruit trees meant that you had a lot of bees. No one wanted to pay for the maintenance, right? But they were paying for the maintenance of ornamental things anyhow. But somehow in their mind, there's a lot of maintenance expense. And it's true. There's a little more maintenance in growing fruit trees. Actually, that's very true. So, I got into growing my own food. At one point, I was the first goji farmer in the Midwest. In fact, Our Detroit magazine did an article on my little goji farm. I had grown something like close to 1,000 Lycium barbarum, which is the goji berry. And so I had been experimenting with growing a bunch of different things. I was knee deep into trying to learn about health and wellness and how do I take the most advantage of my little landscape that I have, my own little personal garden. And what happened, just a quick divergent to the goji berries, and it is relevant to the farm contractor. It's at one point I had someone call me and try and sell me on this pyramid scheme, sort of multi-level marketing goji juice. Do you guys remember this stuff?
Oh yeah.
It was like 40. Yeah. Did either of you end up selling it or buying into it? I hope not.
No.
I stay away from multi-level marketing like the plague.
I try to stay away from any type of juices that come from these super fruits that just kind of appear out of nowhere. And there's always someone looking to make a quick buck like that.
Well, that's very wise, and it's good. That's a really healthy way to look at it. At the time, everyone in my little clique and community of friends, we were all excited about, the potential of certain healing foods, and the goji thing came out, and it is present in Tibetan medicine, just not as big as it's been marketed to be, but it is there. Yep, it is there. So some friends of mine were trying to sell me on this goji juice, and hey, it's raw and it's organic, and it's the best thing. It can do this, it can do that, and all you got to do is commit to buying, like $300 worth of this shit every month, and then you get. Right. Then you got to get 20 or 80. You got to bug all of your friends to get them burdened with the same $300 monthly expense. And so then I started asking them, I'm like, well, wait a second. It's raw and it's organic. All right. So can you produce any documents that confirm this? And, oh, sure, we can. Well, like 2-3 weeks later, nothing. There was no documents, no confirmation. Then I found out that this juice only contained 10% goji juice. 90% of it was pear and apple. Huh. And the 10% goji juice was reconstituted, which means they dehydrated the berry and then rehydrated it, which means it came from China. They dehydrate it to lessen the weight, and then they ship it over, and then they rehydrate it. So basically, it's a $40 half gallon of apple juice.
Marketing.
Marketing, and also people who are into the health and wellness, there's a quality that comes to opening your mind that is can produce a lot of gullibility, So it's easy to sell these things to, oh, this is a superfood. Oh, all someone has to do is they hear it. Okay, it is. And then they believe it is, and then they spend any amount of money on it. Anyhow, I thought, you know what? The more I looked into this product and the more I looked into goji berries, it was just like shrouded in mystery, like they grow in the river, the low river plains of Asia, or they grow in the high mountains of the Himalayas. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to buy some, and I'm going to try to grow them here in Detroit. And within 1 year, I took them from seed to probably like 5 feet tall. I mean, they were very voracious growers here, and then I left them over winter in pots in my driveway. Now, for those of you who don't know gardening in Michigan, if you leave something in a pot,
it's dead
outside in the winter, it's pretty much dead. So I thought, you know what, if they survive the winter in these pots, I'll keep working with them. And sure enough, they all survived. And then I thought, holy crap, like this thing is super hardy. So then I tripled the amount I was growing and started growing more and more and more and more. And now I believe and I made a YouTube video. It's actually, there's a YouTube video. It's got like 50,000 hits that I did for a film project I was involved in called Indie Edibles. And it meant Indie Edibles stood for Independent Edibles. And it was a kind of a name that we gave this film project. It was all supposed to be all about urban farming and edible landscaping in the city of Detroit. It was a little pilot project. I think I only had about 3 months into it before I had a tragedy in my life that caused me to have to stop doing it. But all wrapped within this, I came up with the idea of what I call the farm contractor or the farm gardener, and check out how it works. So coming full circle to one of the other inventions I'm really proud of. So a lot of homeowners, in fact, I talked to Henry Ford West Bloomfield Hospital. One of their executives at the time I was meeting with. Henry Ford Hospital in West Bloomfield is a very progressive hospital. They serve organic food in their hospital. They have a greenhouse now where they're growing some of their food. At the time, they were looking at spending several, $2 million on their landscape or something like this. And I presented this idea to the executive, and I told him, okay, so check this out. Here's how it would work. We'll build and design a functional and aesthetic garden, right? So all the elements of a traditional landscape, layer, texture, layer, progression, flow, all of it, but everything's going to be edible. We're going to maintain it for you for free. We're going to sell you the produce below wholesale at whatever percentage below wholesale. And then whatever you can't consume, we'll sell to the general public and we'll split the proceeds on it, or we'll take 80% of the proceeds. So the basic idea to the farm contractor is that this is a gardening company that, now look at it for like a home in Bloomfield Hills, which is a wealthier part of southeastern Michigan. Some of these folks will spend $1 million on their landscape, $500,000. And so if they were to invest $500,000 and we were to build them a functional and aesthetic farm, a gentleman's farm, a gentle lady's farm, first of all, you have bragging rights as a homeowner, right? So when you throw your dinner parties, people are on the patio, people are overlooking your orchards and your vineyards and your asparagus stands and your peach trees. I mean, it just from a quality of life standpoint, it had a lot of bragging rights, not to mention the fact that you have food security. But even beyond food security and bragging rights, this homeowner now makes one landscape investment once, and they don't ever pay to maintain it again. And instead of it costing them money every year, it's bringing them money in the form of food every year. Mm-hmm. And then from the farmer standpoint, from our end of it, instead of paying for property, we get paid for our farm, and we pay no utilities, no water, no electricity. And from a transportation standpoint, there is almost no transportation fees because our farm is right within the population that we're ultimately delivering it to.
Sounds like a fantastic model. Everybody seems to win.
Yeah.
Everybody wins. And so here I am, guys. I'm dealing with this one business guy who tells me he makes whatever, $180 million a year. And he claims to be a really progressive guy. And he's real into spirituality and this and that. And I'm trying to explain this project to him. And I have Henry Ford Hospital telling me, look, we love the idea, but you got to show us that it works. And I remember telling them, I'm like, what do you mean show you that it works? Like, there's the bid that the landscape companies are giving you for your landscape. It's like $1 million plus. So that's money you're going to have to spend. Farms, that's already a proven thing. We know that people need food. That's not a question mark.
Right.
You know that you have a problem. Right. They already knew they had a problem getting enough organic produce at a proper price to supply their hospital, which is kind of like a hotel.
It really is. It's a beautiful hospital.
It is. In fact, they hired the former CEO of the Ritz-Carlton hotels chain to open that because they wanted it to feel like an elegant hotel. So all of the elements of this business plan are already known elements. People need organic food. People spend money on their landscape. Most landscapes are a waste of money. It costs you money on the front end, and it costs you money every year. And the only thing you get back from it is an aesthetic value, and that is subjective. So
it's not functional. It's kind of all show and no go, right? So what you seem to be suggesting is like this functional gardening, functional landscape, and it makes sense intuitively.
Yeah, and it's got a deeper level of functionality. And if any of my clients happen to listen to this, an ornamental garden, I got to backtrack.
Cover your tracks.
Right. An ornamental garden has dynamic function in the sense that there's an aesthetic value. You could be getting flowers and herbs and cuttings from it. Its value is mainly in the form of aesthetics. So this is dynamic value. It has aesthetics, and it's producing food, and it's saving you money. So there's just more functionality. An ornamental garden has functionality, but there's less of it. So you're getting more. There's more abundance in this new form. And it blew me away, guys, to find out, to talk to this guy, this apparently, conscious, and this guy bragging about, the $180 million a year he makes, which he had to have been lying about. I mean, but and he's sitting there telling me, he doesn't know. We were trying to put $3 million into a 60-acre piece of land to basically build a model, because I had created an entire agricultural model. There are only a certain amount of plants that grow effectively in our climate. Like, your options for what to grow are fairly limited. And there are low maintenance, high productive plants that kind of anyone who does gardening knows about these. So anyhow, couldn't get this guy to pull the trigger on it. Maybe I was not presenting well. In fact, that was probably the real source of why he could do it. I was very amateur at my presentation. But this is a business model I've told many people about in southeastern Michigan, and hope to one day, get out. Maybe this podcast will help inspire someone to do it. There's no protecting it. There's no patenting it. It's not a utility. It is all I've done is I saw pre-existing elements within our community, but what I was able to do was see how if you rearranged them in a new way, you would get something that was way more productive.
Yeah, like a more effective use of land. And nowadays, I think we really need it. And we'll need it more and more.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Could you imagine that? If you're going to spend $20,000 on your landscape and you get to hire the farm gardeners or the farm contract, the farm gardeners, and they come and you give them the 20 grand, they build this farm, and then they're out in your yard and they're working every week. They're maintaining this. This is basically their farm. And then you get 20% of the yield. They take 80%. Obviously, the risk to the homeowner, to the investor, is what happens if the farm gardener goes out of business. And that at the beginning stages of this business plan, that's a very serious risk, because then you got $20,000 into a farm that you don't want to maintain.
Right.
So if there are any agricultural
burden.
Yeah, if there's any, if anyone listening to this is into agriculture, it doesn't matter what climate you're in. If you want to have an agricultural business, consider this model. It's so simple, but it works. In fact, my brother-in-law did a very small version of it with beekeeping, with beehives. People wanted beehives, right, in their yards. Well, he would build them the beehive and install it, but they didn't want to maintain the beehive. They didn't want to deal with the bees. They didn't want to extract the honey. So they buy his beehives. He gets paid on that end. Then he sets it up in their yard. The bees work and make use of their flowers, their fields. And then he just shows up to extract the honey. And then they split it.
That's awesome.
Right. It's good for both people. Win-win situations.
Yeah.
Totally.
So that was I don't hope I didn't take up too much of our interview with
it was a bit of a rabbit hole, man, but highly, highly interesting, and it's got my gears going.
Yeah. I hope it inspires, more people to look into this. But I want to speak a little bit about your transition from landscaping and gardening and designing gardens to what you're doing right now, which is your dance meditation. So can you describe that a little bit? How you changed your approach and your flow?
Yeah. So dance meditation technique that was officially launched in November of 2011, but the very first one I did was in 2009. And basically, so the whole time that I'm building this gardening company, and I built another small company in my early 20s also, I was raising 2 daughters and was married and had a lot of downtime in the winter to get creative and work on projects and conceive of things and try to make things happen. But that whole time, I would say my real main life focus and practice was the study and practice of meditation through various different paths. So that whole time, I'd spend a lot of time in my life practicing these techniques, being around those teachers, finding those teachers, and trying to understand this whole life thing, trying to understand, why I was suffering so much. Is there really a way to end that suffering? Why does life seem, why are things so difficult? So that was really the whole time, this underpinning. Even, of course, the idea of the farm contractor was born out of my study and my life practice of food's relationship to our well-being. So anyone who gets into health and wellness, whether it's, in meditation traditions or whatever, is going to quickly find that our relationship to plants is a huge part of it. Huge part of it. I mean, they produce the oxygen we're breathing. They provide us with food. Our relationship to these plants is a vital part of living well. So I went through a really, really difficult divorce shortly after I started that film project. And that is really what turned the tides. I really, really thought I had seen everything that was difficult and hard. And then that happened. And it was very, very traumatic. I'd been with my ex-wife since we were kids, 15 years old. And we had gone through some really unusual experiences together. Like, for example, she helped me break out of a lockdown facility that I got sent to in Utah. So I spent a year. Yeah, I spent a year in a lockdown facility in Utah. And she helped me get out of there. And we, drove across the country and were being chased by people. I mean, it was just like unbelievable.
Sounds like an episode of Prison Break.
Yeah, it was. I was the only kid to successfully escape that school.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I will chalk that up to karma. And so, this was someone who was a major presence in my life. And it just rocked my world. It just rocked my world. And that set on this whole new stage of soul searching. She really defined everything about who I was to me. And so now I'm here without her. And so she used to practice with this woman, Safi, that I mentioned earlier also. So we had a similar lineage of teachers, and all the spiritual workshops and teachers that we would go see, we would often go see together. And it got to a point where, so I studied with Safi for about 3 years, and then she moved to Hawaii, and our practice group dissolved when she moved. And what I started to realize is that nobody in the community, as I got more familiar with other people teaching yoga and other people teaching meditation, no one was teaching the techniques that she taught. I started to realize that the way she taught was extremely unusual. And for me, it was extremely effective. She was a very difficult person for a lot of people to deal with. She was Eastern European, very opinionated, bossy Czechoslovakian woman. Yeah, but for some reason, I looked up to her like a mother, and I adored her, and do to this day. So I started to realize that, I'd go to these other workshops and I'd had various different experiences. And for the exception of a couple of very, very, very advanced teachers that I got to meet, like Gaelic Rinpoche and Amma and Dr. Auric Lasser, a lot of the mainstream yoga teachers I was encountering really it became clear they had very little understanding of what they were doing. And when
Sorry to interrupt. What do you think the biggest difference is between the people who you thought were the good performers or the good teachers, and then the great ones and the best ones that you really looked up to? Did you narrow down was it charisma? Was it technique? Was it knowledge? Was it a combination? What would you say separated?
What makes a difference between what?
A good teacher and a great teacher, because you said there were some that you just didn't connect with, and then others like Safi that you really looked up to.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there are some really shitty teachers too. So not just like the difference between a good teacher and a great teacher, but like what, and there are a lot of teachers who get into it because they really want to be teachers. Their motivation is to teach. Really great teachers don't have that motivation. Their motivation was to understand. And I think the greatest teachers probably had no choice in the matter. They probably didn't set out to become great teachers. It kind of fell on them through whatever reasons, karma or otherwise. Their motivation, were just
such intense students and such good students that it just was like a natural progression. Or
exactly, that is exactly it. The greatest teachers have to be the greatest students. How else do you learn? I mean, who's the greatest carpenter? I also have a little podcast that I started where I just kind of, ramble different thoughts. And one of them, one of the series is called #DestroyBS. And I give a technique for how to differentiate, how to understand otherwise abstract spiritual concepts. And it's and the way that you do it is you just apply it to something mundane. So instead of saying like, what makes a great spiritual teacher? Well, what makes a great carpenter? Someone who has done a ton of carpentry, someone who has built furniture, built homes, worked with hand tools, worked with power tools, more so than their own direct experience. The best carpenters are those who also benefited from the experience of the great carpenters before them. So yeah, what makes someone a really great teacher is, I think, how good of a student they were. And are. And and then you also, in Tibet, there's this saying, I remember reading it, that for the student who's ready, even a false teacher can bring enlightenment.
That's deep.
Yeah, so there's the reality that when the student is ready, so a lot of these yoga teachers out there who maybe don't have much direct experience, they're repeating what they were told, they're doing the flows that they were shown, they may not have much meditative realization, but they might say something that's like super helpful to someone else. And I think that's what they were intending with that statement that I read long time ago. Even for the student who's ready, even the false teacher can bring enlightenment. And enlightenment in that sense would be on the ultimate sense of enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And what I was talking about, like when someone says something inspiring, that might be like a little mini enlightenment, like a little mini boost or lift, rather than the ultimate state of enlightenment, which I have no idea what that is, but, am actively hopeful and practicing, and definitely my own experience has led me to believe that I could see how such a thing could be possible. In terms of
it's definitely the next level of things, and there's certainly times I myself have felt I don't want to say close to it because I don't know how close or how far I was, but there's just times where I would feel really at peace, and that just everything is the way it is, but it is the way it's supposed to be. And it's hard to explain, but it's just the feeling that everything was right. And it was just like, it was close to what I'd like to say to Zen, but like I said, I've not found enlightenment, but maybe one day.
Yeah, and those little things that we get. You know, I had an experience once sitting at a meditation at this one yoga retreat, and one of the founding students of this place, a gentleman much older than me, sat next to me, very close next to me, and I had this pretty unusual experience at the end of it. And I remember asking, I attributed the experience to him. I thought it was just the proximity of him, and that he had reached a level of meditative realization that made his very presence helpful for someone like me. And so I asked him about it. He said, no, it has nothing to do with me. He said, sometimes you get these little gifts. It's almost like, you know, well, I mean, think about it with something mundane. If you're Brian, you're a health and wellness coach, you're a fitness coach. I mean, someone wants to get a six-pack and maybe they're really heavy and overweight. You know, as much of a struggle as it is at first, they're going to feel little victories when they got, 30 push-ups in or 30 sit-ups in. They never thought they could. You know, they're still overweight.
Right.
You know, but that little victory helps then propel them, and they can see what's possible. So those moments where you felt that, you know, the way it's been explained to me is those are little tastes of what's possible if you keep working at creating the conditions.
Right on. And sorry, I totally took us off track, but we got off onto teachers and everything. But so you said that you were learning from different teachers, but there was just seemingly like a lack of good teachers, to put it nicely, I guess. So how did the dance MT how did it grow?
So yeah, it's there's a lot of teachers I saw saying things like, just be, let go, just let go. These are things that you hear all the time, right?
How
right.
do I do that?
Right. It's so easy to say this. It's a cruel thing to say to someone, really.
It really is.
Yeah, it's not fair. And what I realized when I was hearing people say this is like, man, I never heard that from Safi. I never remember hearing that. But she would create the conditions where those things would happen. Anyhow, I got involved with this event called the Original Motor City Funk Night, and it was the largest, most longest-lived, notorious monthly event in the city of Detroit ever. And there would be some 2,000 people the last Friday of every month, and it would be underground, warehouses and blown-out buildings, and I got to the honor of getting to manage that event along with two other people. I managed mainly the contracts, negotiations, and the logistics of the event once it was happening. And I got to become good friends with Frank Raines, who was the founder of the event and really the creative director of it. And it was amazing. I mean, the biggest party I had seen to that point, because I was a 20-year-old father, so I never got into a party scene ever. I'd never seen more than 30 people at a party before, and here I was, at Hoban Foods, an old slaughterhouse in Detroit, with 2,000 people, and it started to dawn on me that there were certain things that would happen. There were some great dance floor moments for sure, where there'd be 300 or 400 people on the dance floor, but it became obvious that people were getting so intoxicated, so wasted, so drunk, really, really longing for this feeling of dancing around the fire, There's something in them longing for it, but it's like they didn't have access to it without the use of these chemicals to help drop the inhibitions and the fears. And it just became clear to me, like, well, I was taught ways like to get right past that without drugs. And you could have an incredible high. I saw them chasing the high. Everyone's chasing the high. There's a reason we get into drugs and drinking, because there is a natural high that I think our soul sort of remembers and wants.
It's like a primal urge almost.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Look at all the native cultures, Native Americans, if you go back to the Druid, it doesn't even matter what culture it is. If you go far enough back, you can see that music and dance were a huge part of pretty much every culture that we know about.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so it became clear to me, like, how much I loved putting on events and how much I was learning from them, and that I started to grow in confidence that I could share the principles of what I was taught. So the way I was taught, like if you were to go to my teacher's class, you were to go to a DMT, it wouldn't make sense probably how I got the dance meditation technique from what she taught. Because it was really her teachings were the base of it, and then several other teachers, what I learned from them added to it, plus my own understandings that arrived through my own experience in life. So I knew what the principles were, and I was able to format those principles, just like with the farm contractor, right? I took these pre-existing elements and reformatted them in a totally unique way that worked with tremendous efficiency. So what took me months and months and months to have an experience of through my first teacher, I've been able to give to certain people within one night. And this is nothing mystical. This is just the sort of the feeling of joy that, Brian, you've attended.
Yeah, a few times.
Yeah.
I believe 3, maybe 4.
Okay. Maybe, do you have anything to share it? Because you can tell where I'm headed with this.
Yeah, it's for me anyway, it was a progressive just being able to let go and just move however my body wanted to move. I'm a white boy with no rhythm, and so like it's terrifying. There's not enough alcohol in the world to get me out on the dance floor, but the one thing I can definitely say is you create this safe space for everyone's seemingly fragile ego to just go ahead and let go and move the body. That's I think one of the biggest things that we lack in 21st century North America is a lack of just movement. And so I don't know, that was my experience anyway.
Yeah, and it's a very simple gift that was given to me, and I love giving it to other people. And it's the joyfulness of finally reaching a place where you're not concerned with the other person, and the mind goes back into the body. It goes back into your body. And there's so much energy that comes when that happens. Tremendous energy. And the way that that's experienced at the dance meditation techniques is the people that practice with me regularly develop tremendous physical agility. I've heard so many people say, oh, I don't know how to dance. I don't have any rhythm. Or like Brian was joking about, like, I'm a white guy and I don't have any rhythm. And all I would say is, yeah, come to 10 DMTs and then tell me after the 10th one you don't have any rhythm. I've taught this for 6 years now. I've never taught one person how to dance. The technique, when you apply it, you discover for yourself. It causes the individual to have their own discovery.
Yeah,
every time.
It's a stimulus for the person to find the rhythm within themselves.
Yep. And then, of course, once they find that rhythm, over time, that develops to become a sense of trust, when they can trust themselves in the simple sense of like, hey, I'm at a club and there's a great band playing and my body's bumping, and I can trust that I can go ahead and let my body do this, and it doesn't matter what it looks to other people. I'm loving it. I'm enjoying it. So I came up with this style of delivering the principles of this technique, and of course, over the years, it has gotten very, very refined. But immediately, I knew it would work because it worked for me. I knew how it worked, why it worked, and I had a lot of direct experience myself. And so I was very, very confident that it would work and other people would have the same experience, and that's been the case. And I've had people tell me like tremendous things. I had one of my friends who's a doctor of psychiatry at U of M, or I'm sorry, he's an assistant professor of psychiatry. He has his doctorate in psychiatry. And he told me that he had like a serious, tremendous phobia of dancing around other people, like to the point that he never would do it ever. And after attending a couple, like a handful, maybe 3 or 4 of the DMTs, it was gone and it's never returned for him. I mean, I've heard stories of people, telling me that, because not only are we doing movement practice, we're also doing sound. We're also practicing making sounds. I've had people tell me afterwards they just started singing after they went home, and they were just singing, and ever since then they just sing all the time. Now, I never claim that these are going to be results because they're not predictable. That's not scientific.
Individual results may vary.
Individual results may vary. Yeah, that's it. The results that I can definitely claim are as the technique is applied, you're going to have a tremendous physical workout, tremendous physical release, emotional release, mental release, and over time, like I said, the agility becomes tremendous. And there are, of course, deeper lessons to it too. The main principle at work is, think about like a dog. If you try to train a dog that's been stuck in a cage for a week, it's not going to work. You let the dog out of the cage, it's going to be a neurotic mess. It can't sit, roll over, retrieve. You can't train a dog in that state. You have to let it run for miles. You have to bathe it, feed it, give it some attention. And then you can slowly start working with it. But a lot of people get into meditation and they try to sit for an hour. Yeah,
and baby steps.
Yeah, you can't sit for an hour if your mental, physical, and emotional bodies are full of neurotic tension.
Yeah, and most people give up because 5 minutes in, they're like, I can't do this. My mind's running. I'm thinking about things. And then they just they burn out, instead of taking a more measured approach, like what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I did that. I'd burn out. When I first started, I would try to sit for 2 hours. I would make myself sit for 2 hours, and I would get so agitated. And I also had a lot of interesting insights. But once I started working with Safi and movement was combined into it, that's when I started to experience what I would call spontaneous silence. That was a silence. That was a mental silence that was not being generated. Like mantra, for example, that's when we superimpose one specific thought on top of all the other thoughts. Mm-hmm. As soon as you remove that thought, all the other thoughts fly back in. It's not what is called spontaneous silence. Spontaneous silence would be all of the thoughts subside. Mm-hmm. They just subside of their own accord.
I'm up to about 5 seconds of that in my meditation practice before the thoughts start coming in.
That's beautiful. And then when the thoughts come, you just welcome them. Mm-hmm. And then you start to realize, the thoughts are always arising on that mental silence. Like there's nothing other than that mental silence that's there. They show up on it, then they vanish into it. But that's conceptual, what I just said right there. If the whole point of yoga's everywhere nowadays, but the whole point of it was to prepare your body for meditation. You would go through these exercises and these breathings to open the body, to release physical tensions, to balance some of the energies of the body so that it was easier to sit and meditate.
See, I always thought it was a good way to show off your Lululemon.
Right. Yoga porn. That's
right.
Well, that's what it's become.
If it's not on Instagram, it never happened.
Yeah, or it's not worth happening.
Yeah. And, it's fascinating. I'm interested to see what comes of it, because this could be the natural progression. Like in a forest, like if you go up into northern Michigan, up in the dunes, there's certain trees that grow up there, like certain poplars, and they grow in the sand. And those trees help prepare the soil to become rich enough to then sustain trees like oak trees or maples. So in the formation of a forest, there are certain plants that arrive in really shitty soil, and their presence and their decomposition makes the soil capable of hosting really big, powerful oak trees. And in the same way, I wonder if that's what it's like right now in America, with so many people teaching yoga who don't really know or understand yoga. Like, it's on one hand, it's easy to knock them, but on the other hand, I think they're providing a vital service. And I think they could be preparing the ground for America to become a spiritual center for the world, much in the way old India was. But it's important to also have commentary like this, and to know and to point out that other gentleman that you guys just interviewed, what was his name? The funny guy with the red hair?
Oh, JP Sears.
Yeah, he's doing a great service. By pointing out and helping many people like us, all of us, see what's ridiculous and nonsensical and absurd. But the specific thing I'm speaking towards is like the main point of yoga is for the person to be able to work with their mind, to be able to work with your mind. It has nothing to do with the body. So when someone's posing photos of themselves in their hot, yoga porn, I mean, I love it. Believe me, I think it's beautiful to see all these men and women in their beautiful bodies and these beautiful poses, but there's nothing spiritual about that. There's, like the circus, as you guys mentioned, circus performers can get into these postures better than any of these yogis.
It's true.
Yeah, it's true. There's nothing spiritual about it. I mean, nothing. Nothing spiritual about the physical asana itself. It's meant to help you build a bridge to the mind so that you can see the mental tensions of anger, hatred, jealousy, fears of various different sorts, and then ultimately help you become flexible mentally. So that even when you hate someone, and there's someone I don't like at all who just wrote me an email back as we're having this conversation, which is hilarious. It's this other person in my little local community who's like a new age spiritual teacher, and this person just says some of the dumbest things, and people listen, and I feel obliged, being a leader in this little area in my little circle, to point out some of these dangers. Like, for example, when someone tells you you're the guru, you guys have heard this a lot, right?
Mm-hmm. I've heard it before. Yep.
We hear it all the time, right? You're the guru. Hey, you're the guru. You're your own best teacher. It sounds good. And it's like, we want to believe it. I'd like to believe that I'm the guru. But I mean, if you're honest with yourself, think about it. Like, I don't know where I would be without my teachers.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'd be dead. I'd be dead.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no two ways about it. I'd be lost. Look at Brian. You're recently a father. Look at your little baby girl, and she's 9 months old. Is she her own guru?
Not yet. I think ideally, this is my take on it, is a good teacher teaches us how to become our own guru, and once we've gotten to that point, but I definitely wouldn't. I'd be spinning my wheels in a mouse wheel or a rat wheel, trying to get there myself.
You just have to revisit your teenage years, and then all of a sudden you are the guru, man. You know everything.
That is true.
And you'll see that with your daughter in 12 years, man. She's going to know everything. You're going to have to deal with that shit.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that.
No, but Brian, you nailed it. A good teacher is going to empower you. And I think what happens is that we're so afraid of being exploited because in our Western society, authority is so exploitive. In our experience of authority is that it is generally exploitive. And so we're really...
we follow whoever has the most certainty, or at least expresses or shows the most certainty.
Yeah, that's true.
We could talk about some political stuff right now, but we'll keep it on
Let's avoid
topic.
that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we in a way we're talking about the principles behind those things, the essence of it. This idea that so many young people are thinking, well, I'm the guru, no, there's a difference between like your daughter at 9 months. She has the ability, she has the innate capacity that could be the case, but it'd be like when you bring when she's 4 or 5 years old, you take her to the grocery store, and if one of these new age gurus came around and was like, oh, she knows what's best for her. No, she doesn't. She's going to go to whatever is shiny, to whatever has the coolest cartoon character on it. And you know what? All of those things are the ones full of corn syrup and full of genetically modified food. She would become prey. That's just absolute, obviously empirically true. And I would argue the very same thing is true for someone who's new and young in the spiritual community who thinks they know what's best for them. I couldn't encourage anyone listening to this who wants to get into meditation, who wants to get into spirituality. Learn from as many teachers as you can. Become exposed to as many teachers as you can. Realize that you do need wise elders in your life, and be very, 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 very discerning in who you choose to be those wise elders. And even once you've chosen someone to look up to, and that doesn't mean that you stop being discerning towards them.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I get lots of people who look up to me, and and I'm like, hey, heads up, I'm super freaking human. Like I got all kinds of problems. You know what I'm saying? Like, right.
I'm not your guru.
Well, no, in some ways I am. And for some things, for some people, like if you look at guru from the standpoint, there's a relative and an absolute. The absolute guru would be the person who has reached a state of unshakable inner peace. Nothing would shake it. Not death, not the world exploding, nothing. Unshakable inner peace and love radiance. That's the ultimate guru. That I am definitely not. Absolutely not even close. But then there's the relative guru, which is, Brian teaches me something on this podcast, and Klaus teaches me something on this podcast. And, you learn something from when Brian came to the DMT, he learned a little bit more about his capacity to move his own body. That's the relative guru. That could be the carpenter who teaches you carpentry, the painter who teaches you painting, the violinist who teaches you the violin. That could be that yoga teacher who really doesn't know anything about yoga in a deep way, but they just taught you a couple really cool postures that will help your lower back. That's the relative teacher. So there's the ultimate teacher, and then there's the relative teacher.
Absolutely.
And definitely that ultimate, there are not many of those walking around. At least not that I've seen.
No, not at all.
No, very true.
But I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got something going on here in a few minutes, but a few wrap-up questions. What book or books have you gifted most often to people?
I've gifted the Search for the Ageless, Volume 1 and 2 by Edmond Bordeaux Szekely. Edmond Bordeaux Szekely's books, I've probably bought his entire library 7 times and given it out 7 times. Fascinating character. I got a chance to actually develop a friendship with his widow. Really fascinating. Also, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche. I've given that out to many, many people. The Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Gaelic Rinpoche has a couple, I believe several different versions where he's, translating. Also, the Book of Mere Dad. The Book of Mere Dad by Mikhail Naimi. Absolutely mind-blowing, deep book. And the Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramhansa Yogananda. The version that was produced by Crystal Clear Publishing, not by Self-Realization Fellowship.
Okay. I appreciate the clarification there.
Hold on one sec, Brian. Hey, girls. Yeah. I'm on this interview, so if you could just be quiet for just a few more minutes. my daughter's just walked in from yoga.
No problem. No problem. So, who would you want to hear on this podcast?
I would love it if you guys could get like some of the, who never gets interviewed on podcasts are like the old dynastic families. Like, can you get a Warburg on? Can you get a Rockefeller on? Like, I'd be fascinated to hear from the big industrial families, and that's just a group of people we don't get to hear a lot from.
What would you want to hear them talk about?
In particular, I'd be fascinated to know about their spiritual take on life, like their philosophy. Where that's always something that's, these are people with incredible levels of skill. In terms of skillfulness and how they live life, incredible. It might look, it looks to us like there's a lot of brutality that's also there, and unreasonableness towards other people. But if you were to, if you were to look at those folks and say, like, what's really, really admirable, there's a lot that is really admirable. And I could just sit and ask questions on and on and on for hours and hours and hours and days and days and days. I would also love to hear you guys interview, that guy who killed 3 people in New Mexico in a sweat lodge.
Whoa, nope.
No, not familiar.
Such a piece of shit. I mean, he's just one of these. He's just one of these, mind over matter. He just pushed a bunch of people too far, and he went to jail. And I would love to hear someone just embarrass him on the radio, and just point out, just show. Unless he's, of course, willing to like really make some sincere amends. But I believe this guy's like back out teaching people. I forget what his name is, but if you Google this.
New Mexico sweat lodge killer.
Yeah, right. It'll come right up. And the worst part is that he made a bad name for what is otherwise an absolutely beautiful practice, the sweat lodges, Native American sweat lodges. When they're done right and poured by someone with a good heart, they are just a beautiful form, a beautiful type of human technology.
Well, we'll have to look into.
I can't promise we'll try to get him on, but
we'll see. We'll see. It's always a possibility.
Absolutely.
There's a vacuum in the radio world, in the podcast world, for a place where there can be good debates to be had.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, like really good debates. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. My next question is, who's the first person that comes to mind, or what are the principles that come to mind when you hear the optimum human?
I think of like the stories that I hear of the Lakotas, the Lakota Indians. The optimum. When you asked me that question before the podcast, my mind went blank, and I'm like trying to go through my mind thinking, who's an optimum human? I really think Gaelic Rinpoche. The Tibetans really remind me of the Native Americans, not just because of how they look similar, but Gaelic Rinpoche's life, and from a physical standpoint, he has a lot of physical problems. He was overweight for quite some time, but I think the optimum human is someone who is optimizing the reduction of their own suffering and optimizing their ability to bring happiness to other people. I don't think it has, I think it can also relate to money and muscles and things like that. But I think fundamentally, the optimum human is someone who is aware of death and is working to relieve their own suffering and the suffering of other people. And Yeah, I mean, Rinpoche's life is, he's surrounded by amazing students, people who love and adore him. He, and so many of these lamas have the same story, just the community, the loving, beautiful communities that are built around these men and women and the female lamas as well. So this is like very similar to some of the rabbis, some of the very well-known rabbis. They just build a tremendous community around themselves. I don't know. It doesn't feel like a very specific answer, but.
Well, I like it. And I like the fact that you mentioned someone that's trying to better themselves and understand themselves and lessen their own pain and lessen other people's pain, because it's not just being selfish. It's not, I'm the optimum human, I've got $50 million in the bank. It's like, I've helped change my life and other people's lives, and I respect that answer. I like it.
Yeah, and I think, when you see these people, like bragging about how much money they have, there's nothing kind about that, nobody who understands how money works, if you understand how money works, only a few people can have that kind of money. That's like science. That's the science of the monetary system. Not every person cannot be worth 50 million. So if someone has that kind of money and they're bragging about it publicly, they're just an asshole. Like that's just the bottom line about that person, is they're just making everyone who doesn't have it feel shitty.
To me, it means they're missing something from their lives and they have to make up for it or compensate. And it's sad when I see that, quite frankly.
It is
I used
sad.
to get mad, and now I just feel sorry for them because they're so far away from what I think to be, successful now. I used to think, it's all about money. He's got a big house, he's successful. And now I'm like, nah, man, that guy's going the other direction.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's also not about money, right? So I want to have $50 million. I know that you guys want to have $50 million, but I would hope.
I'll take 10.
Yeah.
Right, 10. I'll take 10.
What am I doing with it, and how am I serving the world? That's my thing. What am I doing with my wealth, and how am I serving the world with it, because it is a tool.
That's right. And to realize it's not yours. It's just yours temporarily.
Everything is.
You're the steward of it temporarily. And if you have that kind of money, you don't go around, bragging about it and showing off. And, it's a real honor if someone can be there. And I know a few people like that. And it's always impressive when I meet someone who's like that. So, people who are whatever, it's not the measure. You can have $50 million and die the most miserable death, or you can have nothing and die a majestic death. So the optimum human is the person who can die joyfully.
Well, I think our podcast could be summed up in that sentence.
Yeah, we're gonna die joyfully, or the podcast is. But anyway, so
awkward moment.
yeah. To just wrap up here, Michael, where can people find out more about you and what you do, and find out, how to contact you and how to take one of your classes? What's the best place to reach you at?
Is to go to dancemt.com. So dance meditation technique, dancemt.com. And for people who want to see a little bit more of my creative portfolio, you could go to The Imagine Do. And that's imagine like imagination and do, D-O, theimaginedo.com.
All right.
Cool. Now, I know you do things in Southeast Michigan. Are you all over the Midwest, or do you have other locations that you practice out of?
Yeah, I have a facilitator now in Chicago and one in Colorado, and I just taught to 60 health coaches in Phoenix, and I'm going to be in San Diego at the end of January. So I do have facilitators that are popping up throughout the country, and I hope that continues to happen and grow. My goal is to get dance meditation technique available at least once a week in every yoga studio in the world before I leave this world. So yeah, I travel, and but on a regular basis, no, I only regularly teach here in Michigan.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, we look forward to helping you achieve that goal.
Oh, cool, man. Thanks, guys. Great work with the
Absolutely.
podcast. Keep it up. And you guys are funny and fun. And, I wish you guys luck. And I'll send you any names of people that I encountered that I think might be fun to interview.
Perfect. Awesome, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. We covered, multiple topics and dove deep. And this is one of our longer podcasts, man. So we appreciate
I feel like there might be a
time.
part 2.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there will be.
Yeah.
Awesome. You guys let me know. I'm always ready.
Cool.
Sounds good, Michael.
Thanks so much, man.
Right, gentlemen.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Optimum Human Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to head on over to iTunes and give a 5-star rating and review, which will help spread the word to more awesome listeners just like you. Head on over to theoptimumhuman.com and subscribe to the free newsletter and get the Optimum Human's Blueprint to the Optimum Life. Download it instantly. Thanks for listening.